So I probably shouldn't say this, considering my entire YouTube career is basically built off of being an advocate for this game, but I kind of burned out on Dungeon World. Now, it's nothing against the system. I haven't turned into one of those PBTA hardos that's like, Dungeon World isn't real powered by the apocalypse, you should play Monster Hearts instead. It's just that between my West Marches Discord server and the campaigns I had run for friends ever since I had first discovered the system, I feel like I kind of experienced everything it has to offer. I wanted to explore other RPGs that, excited me a little bit more. I feel like I'm breaking up with an RPG system.
I don't think we should see each other anymore.
But then noted subscriber and DM on my Discord server, Joseph LeMay, told me to check out Grimworld. And it took me a couple months, but I finally did. And boy, oh boy, did it bring back the enthusiasm. So much so that I immediately put together a Dungeon World campaign with my real life friends from college who had never played D-dubs before in their life. But what was it about this over 160-page supplement that brought back my mojo? Well, that's what this video is about. Let's just skip the foreplay. Grimworld decouples race and class. As we all know, the class you pick in vanilla Dungeon World determines what races you can play as. Thieves can only be halflings or humans, clerics can only be dwarves or humans, and paladins can only be humans. Now, I know, the workaround has always to be just homebrew your own racial moves and just make it work in your game, but some people are weird and need an official ruling from the gods, aka the writers of the book. And Grimworld is the providence of those generous gods. It eliminates class-specific racial moves and allows you to pick any race of your choice, or species if that's your preferred nomenclature. Each species has a general racial move that applies to every single playbook. So humans can take a move from any other class playbook, dwarves are always allied with other dwarves, halflings get to treat partial successes on parlay rolls as full successes, terms and conditions do apply, and elves get a free magic weapon. But the decoupling of race and class doesn't end there, because Grimworld introduces new races that you can play as. For example, you can play as a Tusker, which is incredibly similar to an orc. Their whole shtick is that when you're below 10 HP, you can reroll damage if you so choose. You could play as a Primordian, which are like elemental people, and they get to pick an element and they get bonus resistance to that element, as well as looking like that element. Or you could play as a Kobold, who is a Kobold and gets a bonus to setting up traps. Or you could even play as a Boag, which are like frog people that can grab things with their tongues. That's their move. They can stealthily grab things with their tongues. Now, I'm not going to go into depth for all of the races because we have a lot to cover in this video, but just know that Grimworld offers you 15 of them to choose from. But the addition of new races and species isn't just limited to players, because Grimworld gives GMs a ton of new monsters to play with. You like that little segue I did there? A couple standouts to me include the Skinless, which is exactly as creepy as it sounds. They typically assume the appearance of a friend or an ally, and when they gain your trust, they skin you alive and then wear your skin. There's the Death Shadow, which is usually created when a person is cursed by a necromancer, and then when they die, their Death Shadow goes and then tries to undo all of the good that they did in their life. And one of my favorites is a big ol' fuck-off boss monster called the Grey Prince. This is an ancient spirit that travels from world to world, giving creatures the gift of death. When enough creatures on a world die, the Grey Prince can then use their souls to create an undead army to invade the world of the living. Just like the added races, the folks at Boldly Games added a shitload of new monsters, and we have a lot of stuff to talk about. Like the pre-written adventure fronts. This might be the single most helpful thing a book has ever made for new Dungeon World GMs. And there's two reasons for that. Not only does it provide 8 fairly cool adventure ideas to spark your creativity, or just flat out run, but it also gives you a template of what an adventure front looks like so you can create your own. And it does a bit of a better job than the vanilla Dungeon World rulebook. This is so not helpful. Let's use the adventure The Grand Hunt as an example. First, it gives a short description of what the adventure is going to be about. In this case, a massive bear known as the Ursine has awoken from a long hibernation and is terrorizing the mining town of Marigold. The bear has killed at least 100 miners, and the death toll has continued to rise. The town is on the brink of economic collapse when the Hunt announces a public contract that pays an enormous bounty for the pelt of the Ursine. Such a large sum attracts adventurers, heroes, and cutthroats alike. The book provides a bullet point list of the cast, aka everyone who's important for the adventure. In this case, the cast comprises of the Ursine, the Hunt and all sorts of adventurers and cutthroats who came to the town of Marigold, and the Claw Totem Druids, who see the Ursine's awakening as a sign that it's time to wage war on civilization. The short description didn't include them, but they're in the thing. The book then gives you 3 stakes. What will happen to Marigold? Will the hunters slay the Ursine? And will the druids destroy Marigold? Then you get each respective danger or element. So the Ursine is an obvious danger. It has a quick bit of flavor text talking about how it's not necessarily evil, it's just an animal trying to protect its cubs and be left alone. It gives the Ursine an impulse to protect its cubs and be left alone. And it provides 3 grim portents. Miners start getting killed, the mines are shut down, and the mayor considers abandoning Marigold. Finally, there is an impending doom. In this case, Marigold is abandoned. Super easy to follow along with, right? The other 2 dangers or elements were listed in the cast. It's the Open Hunt and the Claw Totem Druids. Just like the Ursine, they also get their own flavor text, they get their own impulses, they get their own grim portents, and they get their own impending doom. I'm not gonna read what those are because that's not the point of this video, but you get the idea. And don't worry, the other 7 adventures are just as thorough with all of the fa blah blah that I just talked about as the Grand Hunt. Though I would say A Tale of Two Towns, the Baymore Butcher, the Rising Tide, and of course, the Grand Hunt are probably the best ones of the bunch. Let's move on. The thing that got me really hype about Grimworld, what made me want to make a video about this book, besides the fact that somebody bought it for me, what made me want to start a new Dungeon World campaign with my real life friends, was the new classes, also known as playbooks. They are the main event of this book and by themselves absolutely justify the $15 price tag for this PDF. By the way, Boldly Games didn't pay me to say this. I'm just stoked about this. There's a total of 6 official new playbooks. More on that later. And they all get me ridiculously excited. Starting in alphabetical order, there's the Battle Master, which is a heavy armor wearing master strategist. Their whole shtick is based around their tactics, which are various buffs that they can grant themselves and their allies in the middle of combat. And they're also built around the gambit mechanic. Basically, every time the Battle Master or one of their party members that they have a bond with takes damage, it adds to their gambit pool. They can then spend that gambit pool on a bunch of things like buffing their damage, buffing their allies, or laying a trap for their enemies. Next, we have the Channeler, which kind of gives off superhero vibes. Essentially, they're living gateways of pure elemental magic, of which they get to choose one, and they channel this magic through...
You're not doing the technique.
AKA they can shoot ice darts, they can blast fire in front of them, they can create water shields. There's a number of tags that let them craft certain sort of powers around it. They can also create elementals, once again based off of a variety of tags that the book has outlined for them. Anyway, let's keep up with the magic theme and talk about the Necromancer, which is a necromancer. I don't know what more to tell you. They raise the dead, they curse their enemies, they have a certain hexed body part that they can detach at will, and it does various magical things. For example, they can hex their foot, which they can then eat to get health back, and then it regrows. It's super creepy and fun. Now, don't mistake this short description as me not liking the Necromancer. I think it is very cool. Is it cooler than the Shaman, though? That is for you to decide, because this is just a segue. The Shaman is clearly very heavily influenced by World of Warcraft Shaman, in that they get 3 totems that they can use to bind the souls of spirits. Now, what do these bound spirits do? Well, they cast spells when you release them. For example, they can heal the Shaman's allies. They can bind the Shaman's enemies. Or they can summon a hurricane. Shamans can also give their totems to their allies, which allows their allies to cast these kind of one-off spells. You know what they say, sharing is caring, which is what the Skirmisher playbook is all about. Okay, not really, but I just needed a segue. While the flavor text emphasizes the skirmisher's speed and says they're like a mobile warrior, that's not really what they're about in practice. In reality, they're kind of like the ultimate battle buddy. Their mechanics are centered on picking a teammate who acts as their fulcrum. Then they use their fulcrum to make attacks. So like anytime their fulcrum takes damage, the skirmisher can attack. Anytime their fulcrum damages the enemy, the skirmisher can attack. you get the idea. They're not totally parasitic though, because they get moves that can buff their fulcrum, and they benefit the fulcrum as much as the fulcrum benefits for, you know what I'm saying. One of the things that I really like about this playbook is it provides a lot of mechanics for when a player can attack. Now, this seems kind of antithetical to what Dungeon World is all about, but I think there's a lot of players who get really confused with the very free-form combat that Dungeon World provides. And so having a class that has these, you know, mechanical, like, yes, you may attack now, parameters installed is really good for noobs. A playbook that is not for noobs is the Slayer, which might be my favorite playbook addition in this book. Why? Well, because the Slayer is literally addicted to killing. Like, physically addicted to killing. Whenever they fail any roll, they get a point of bloodthirst and they get a debuff. If they fail a roll 6 times and they mark all 6 debuffs that are in the game, then they start taking damage. The only way to clear their bloodthirst points and clear all of their debuffs is, you guessed it, killing something. The thing is, bloodthirst isn't entirely negative. The Slayer can add their bloodthirst amount to their die rolls. So if you're at 6 bloodthirst and you roll a 2, which is the lowest you can roll in Dungeon World, that's already an 8, which then opens up the possibility of a Slayer edging themselves out of a kill so that they can keep their bloodthirst benefits, while keeping their debuffs and self-harm intact. Speaking of self-harm, the last class that Grimworld officially adds is the Templar, which is so hilariously evil, I am kind of shocked that they even allowed you the option to be a good aligned Templar. See, the Templar is built entirely around their Wrath mechanic. Basically, they get 3 Wrath charges that they can then spend on a variety of things, like buffing the Templar's damage, consecrating the ground around the Templar, causing AoE damage to enemies, and knocking foes back, among other things. In order to get Wrath charges, the Templar has to perform a cleansing ritual that takes about an hour. If they're in the middle of combat and the Templar needs Wrath charges like ASAGDP, the Templar can self-harm and in return purify their soul, gaining more Wrath points. But the fun doesn't stop at self-harm, because one of the Templar's core moves is literally torture. Like I said, this class is super fucked up. Now, remember when I said that Grimworld adds 6 official playbooks? That sounds kind of weird considering that this is a third-party supplement to Dungeon World, right? You know, technically none of the added playbooks are official. Well, the updated version of this book is kind of like a love letter written to the Dungeon World community, in that it has a lot of content created by the community. So it's like 4th party content, or maybe 9th party content, you know, because it's like 3rd party content to the 3rd party content. I think I'm way too clever. Now, for the most part, these 4th party or 9th party playbooks are limited to compendium classes. These are kind of like elite specs that players can only take when they've met certain parameters. So, for example, one of the compendium classes is called the Wendigo, which sounds like a slur. A player can become a Wendigo only if their character consumes the flesh of their kin. Pretty grim, right? You see what I did there? So fucking funny. There's a grand total of 10 compendium classes in this book. They're all made by the community, and it kinda shows. Anyway, this supplement does add a whole smorgasbord of miscellaneous content in addition to everything I just talked about, but this video is focused on mostly what got me hype and made me fall in love with Dungeon World again. But if all of that content isn't enough for you, and you need something that focuses more on maybe wilderness exploration, then you should totally click right here, because I made a video on it. And thank you so much for watching.